Lovecraft Country, Into the Multiverse. Season 2, Episode 1, The Life of Death. Fanfiction. By Renée Michele. The episode picks up right before the bridge exiting Ardham. Letty, Hippolyta, Gia and Montrose are all in shock regarding what they have seen, lost. None seem to notice the absence of Dee, yet. They place Tick's lifeless body on the ground and begin to clean Woody out its debris. On the ground, near the car is the mangled body of a dead officer. His eyes are coated over white and most of his right arm is gone. Hippolyta, who was initially in shock as well, stares at the body and back to the empty car. Dee! She exclaimed, riddled with guilt for leaving her in the car. Dee appears out of the clearing to calm her mother's fears. "I'm fine, Mama." "Where were you?" Hippolyta asks her daughter hurriedly. "Finishing up," she says and resumes her walk towards the car. She turns to look in the direction she'd come from and lifts her hand toward her Shoggoth, who seems to feel the loss of Tick and burrows its way into the ground. Mother and daughter face the others and proceed to lift Tick into the car. Montrose is eerily quiet. His mind is full, heart empty. He sits silently in the back, gripping Tick's letter to his chest. Unknown to the rest of them, Montrose had no intention of releasing his son. Not yet. Eyes coming into focus. Things are blurry at first. Ruby is dizzy and still trying to get her bearings. As much as she could remember, Christina had just arisen from the bed. It was the first time they'd slept together as themselves. She replayed the events in her mind. Wondered how she came to the conclusion that somehow sticking by Christina would mean she'd have William. She felt connected with William through her. She'd never felt as good as she had with him, know him. Then came Letty. Sitting at Mama's grave. Crying like she knew so well. Ruby had resolved to pick herself this time, until Letty finally told her everything. The multiverse. Going back to Tulsa. The Book of Names. The book her nephew George writes in the future. This was bigger than she realized. She was a pawn again. An ends to a means. Christina had bought Letty that house, not Mama. There was no money left for her. Yes, she knew, she had used Christina. She knew it, but she used her to have William, to know magic. Christina used her to get to Letty. She used her to get to Tick. As much as she admonished Letty for being like Mama, she could see that right now, she was more like her Mama than anyone else. Christina lifted herself out of bed after they had sex. She looked back at Ruby, faint love in her eyes as she walked into the bathroom. Ruby had to think quickly. She knew Christina had left a vial of her blood in the basement on her work table. She was preparing it to become William, no doubt. Slipping the key off the dresser, she went to the door, pausing for a moment, wondering if she could really do this. Her decision was made. She had to. She was down the stairs and had just reached the table, had her hands around the vial when she felt a sharp pain on the back of her head and felt herself slowly lose consciousness. Everything was quiet around her now. There was no sign of Christina. The covers were pulled up to her neck. To her left lay the body of William. She felt a longing for him that she could not shake. "Ruby, stop it. Make sense. Go find your family." She rushes upstairs, gets dressed and gets the set of keys for Christina's car off the table. She had to find her sister. Letty sat in the back seat, clutching her midriff. She had to protect George at all cost. He was all she had left of Tick. She felt stuck in a time warp. She knew that all of this was inevitable. She and Tick had spoken of it, discussed George's book at length, but somehow the reality wasn't sitting right with her. She'd lost so much in a day. Her sister and Tick. She was on the verge of something and she didn't like it. Woody, tired, ticking and a little beat, pulls into Letty's house. They intend to call Reverend Thompson over to the house. Arrangements must be made. As they pull in, they find Christina's slick silver car parked in the driveway. They all look at each other in dismay. As they rush inside, they find Ruby seated at the kitchen table, cup of tea in hand. The sisters see one another and jump to embrace one another. "Wait," says Letty, "where was I when Mama died?" Letty. "What?" Letty grabs a knife off the counter, holding it up to her sister in a menacing manner. "Where was I?" "In jail, Letty. You was in jail." Letty drops the knife next to the table, exhausted. She is holding her waist with one arm, holding her hand with her other hand. Tick? Ruby asks. Letty shakes her head to indicate what she does not have words to say. Ruby embraces her. The sisters are interrupted by Montrose, who hurries into the kitchen. You can get us into Christina's house, right? Letitia shakes her head. She knows Montrose is still in denial. Montrose, it's over. We gotta let go. I ain't letting go of shit. My son saved me, now I'm gonna save him. Didn't Christina take pages out of that book? If we can get our hands on those pages. Remember what Hippolyta told us, Montrose? We can't go back and change any past events because it will change history as we know it. It will alter things. That's what I intend to do. Ruby openly rebukes the idea. Then what, Montrose? What if things go wrong with you trying to do this? What if you bring something back with you? Are you prepared for that? I spent my life being scared. I'm done with that, Ruby. I'm prepared to get my son back. Turning his back on Ruby, he takes Letty's hands, almost pleading. Letty, you said you binded white folk from magic. That it's ours now. What we gonna do with it? Hannah said magic was a gift to be passed on. It don't make sense to have it and not use it. Montrose sighs as he braces himself to tell his story. There was something we ain't tell you, in Tulsa. There was a stranger that saved me, George and Dora, from them white folk that came in the square that night. I still had pieces of Thomas all over me. Dora and George came up on they bikes and we was fighting as much as we could. Looked like we was bout to lose when a stranger with a bat came. He beat them crackers down. Then said, I gotcha, kid. And he did, Letty. He did. We'd have been dead if he ain't come. Letty, that stranger? It was Tick. He changed something. Did something different. If he didn't save us, we wouldn't be here. He wouldn't have existed. He did something. Now we have to. Hippolyta, Dee and G all find themselves back at Dee's and Hippolyta's. The night has been long. They're all weary. Gia is feeling all the weary parts of her human self. Tick's demise makes the abundant loss so prevalent. First young Ja, then her mother, now Atticus. What was left for her in this human world? What did she have to return to in Korea? She stood for a moment, looking at Woody, knowing that Tick's body was being held within. She had to figure out a way to let go. She'd walked away from many deaths in her existence, but this death was different. Atticus was it. Her very last love. Uma had finally accepted her, then died. Who would love her now? Now inside of the living room, leaning on the frame of the door, Gia is so stilled in her thought she doesn't hear Hippolyta come up behind her. She jumps at the feel of Hippolyta's hand on her shoulder. She hands Gia a set of towels. Gia in response tries to brush away her tears. Take the time you need, Gia. It was Tick's wish. This thing that happened tonight? That makes us family. Her heart warms at the word family. Tick was right. She turns to go to the bathroom as Hippolyta turns toward the kitchen. As Gia arrives at the door of the bathroom just as Dee is wiping the remnants of Christina off her new hand, Dee looks up from her hands, over the bathroom basin and meets Gia's eyes in the mirror. The first time is always the most difficult, Dee. Even if it's not while you are doing it. In her silence, Gia gets it. Hot tears stream down Dee's face. These children, in the summer, in this neighborhood were unwillingly grown. Grown into caskets, grown into killers. Suddenly in that moment, Gia knew she had found a space to fit. Ruby, Letty and Montrose reach Christina's front gate. All three are sitting in the car as the engine whittles down. There is a slight hesitation in all three as they get to the gate. Ruby slips the key into the lock and opens it. As they approach the front door, Ruby touches the knob and the door slips open. The frame has been broken into. The house has been ransacked. Alarmed, Ruby runs to the basement door to find it ajar. They run down the steps to find Christina's lab in disarray and Horatio's stolen pages. Missing. End scene.